turn of events.
This is absolutely incredible, Joe. Absolutely. A series of unexpected things have led to this day.
You were supposed to do Duncan's podcast, and then Duncan and I got on the phone, and he was saying, trying to move tickets for the psychedelic event.
Yeah.
And then Duncan said, hey, man, you can have him on your show. And I said, well, why don't you come on, too? It'll be really fun. Then this morning, Duncan has a root canal, like an unexpected emergency root canal. So it was just a crazy turn of events, and fortunately, you're here.
Yeah, I just came in from Ukraine, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Ooh, what are we doing over there?
Training therapists and psychiatrists.
Wow.
So Ukraine has enormous amounts of trauma, and so what I'm trying to do is to go to high trauma areas and try to talk about MDMA-assisted therapy and how that could be helpful.
What is the legality of it over there?
Well, right now it's illegal. They have these terrible laws left over from when Russia was in control, and you cannot even do research with Schedule I drugs.
Wow.
Not with psilocybin, not with MDMA. You can't even do research. But over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of efforts by their military, by other people, to change that because they're aware that they have so much enormous trauma. So a couple months ago, the Ukrainian government put out draft legislation to change the law. And so the training that we did was for 55 psychiatrists and therapists from throughout Ukraine. We did it in the western part of Ukraine, Lviv, which is not really a dangerous area. But even while we were there were multiple air raid sirens. But then they look at their phone and they see the area that the air raid sirens are supposedly about, and they could be like 100 miles square, something like that. So nobody seemed to care. Nobody moved to shelters, and we just ignored these air raid sirens and heard nothing. But it was so emotionally moving because we went to the cemetery in Lviv, and they have these in cities all over Ukraine. And they have something that I've never seen before, is that they have just enormous numbers of graves. Terrible. They've lost about 250,000 people. But the graves all have flags for Ukraine, but they have the pictures of the person that's dead. That's the person that's buried there. And I've never seen that anywhere else. It has even more of an emotional impact because you're actually not just thinking all these people are dead, but you're seeing their pictures. And most of them are younger and tragically interrupted their lives, a fair number of women, and they put them in the center of the cities. They're having to build new grave sites all over, and this was next to a really large old historic cemetery. Yeah, and so it feels to me like what I'm trying to do is to really go to where people, I think, have lots of trauma but don't understand some of these new technologies, meaning psychedelic therapies.
Right. Hardly new.
Well, new to them.
Right.
So they've been very much a conservative society. They don't have legal marijuana. They don't have marijuana.
How dare you?
Sorry. Sorry. Yeah, so it was very moving to be there for just the fact that we were there, that people felt that we were willing to come to the country and be there with them, even though it's in this more safe part of the country. And so the thought that we would, the next steps would all be philanthropy. So I should say that I'm here representing myself. I'm not talking on behalf of MAPS, and I'm not talking on behalf of Lykos, the pharmaceutical company that MAPS helped start a while ago. So I'm just talking for myself personally. But what we're trying to do is really respond to where the trauma is. And next week I'm going to Beirut, which is something I never thought I would be going to. But I've been invited to speak at the American University of Beirut and also a YPO sort of business group. And there's the possibility of potentially at least starting research with MDMA therapy in Lebanon as well.
Do you ever get frustrated at the lack of progress with legalization? Because it seems like so much headway has been made on the therapeutic front. Like so many people have anecdotal stories of like a lot of soldiers with Ibogaine in particular, MDMA in particular, that these people have had incredible experiences, turned their life around, It just, I'm so baffled by the snail's pace of acceptance of these things.
Well, I first tried MDMA in 1982, so we're talking about 43 years ago. And as soon as I experienced it, I thought this has incredible therapeutic potential. It was legal at the time, and
When did it become illegal?
1985. And so MDMA had been it had been legal, but it was sort of quietly used in therapy circles from around 1976 to the
Really?
early 80s. And then it started leaking out of these therapy circles and started being used as a party drug, ecstasy.
Wasn't a lot of that in Dallas?
Yes, a lot of it was at the Stark Club
Yeah.
in Dallas. Yeah, that is really where MDMA became ecstasy.
Lorenzo from the Psychedelic Salon, I learned all about that from him.
Yeah. There's a fellow named Michael Caine is working on a movie about the Stark Club.
Oh, wow.
There's an incredible story because Larry Hagman, who was the star of Dallas, frequented this nightclub with a bunch of the people from the cast, and the police had decided to bust it because they knew that there was all these experiences.
J.R. Ewing?
No, they were all prepared to bust the Star Club that night, and unexpectedly, J.R. Ewing, Larry Hagman showed up, and they canceled the bust because they thought it'd be too embarrassing to bust him, and they busted it another time.
He was on CNN once, and he was talking about how he's not afraid of death because he had an incredible LSD experience.
Yeah.
Did you ever see that?
I did, yeah. And the
They
reason,
were like, what?
well, he did LSD therapy in the 60s. The reason that I even knew that is my mother-in-law read his autobiography. And he talks about doing LSD therapy in the 60s. And so my mother-in-law said, you might want to try to contact this guy because maybe he's got overlapping interests and he'll help out. And it took me a couple of years to get to him, but eventually I did. I'll tell you one funny story is that I got to know him pretty well, and I would stay over at his house a bunch of times in Santa Monica. But he was also in I Dream of Jeannie.
Oh, yeah.
So I Dream of Jeannie is about this genie that comes out of this bottle. He's an astronaut. And a friend of his had made a bong out of the genie bottle. And they wanted to market it, and Larry said, no way. So there was only, two versions of this genie bong. And I had one of my more humorous moments was smoking pot with Larry Hagman out of the genie bong.
That's hilarious. It's so funny when a guy plays this like straight-laced, greedy kind of psycho on a television show, a soap opera show, and then in real life he's a stoner.
Oh, he's incredible. Yeah.
Isn't that interesting, though? It's like, because you would never guess that from the J.R. Ewing character.
Oh, right. No, he was very much pro-psychedelic and had multiple experiences during the 60s. And
the CNN interview was wild, though, because I remember watching it going, oh, you guys weren't ready for this. That's what he said that. They're like, what, you're saying acid's good? It's like literally the opposite of the Bill Hicks joke. You know, that Bill Hicks joke, like you never hear like a good drug story.
Yeah.
It's always young man on acid, thinks he can fly, like dies.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, but that was the one time, a positive drug story from like a beloved star of a beloved show.
Yeah, it was the most popular TV show in the world at some points.
Yeah.
But about your question about frustration, yes, the answer is yes, but it's important not to be overwhelmed, I guess, by frustration, is just to continue plodding along. We've just passed MAPS's 39th anniversary, April 8th. I had 1986 is when I started MAPS. And when I started MAPS, I didn't really know that it would ever succeed, that we would ever make MDMA into medicine. It was the height of Nancy Reagan and Just Say No and the escalation of the drug war.
The worst times.
And I realized that it was worth doing, working towards bringing psychedelics forward, whether it worked or not. And that's what really gave me the mindset to not be overwhelmed by the frustration, by how many obstacles there's been. Because I always had this feeling that we need this kind of healing. We need this access to these experiences. And it's been tragic when we think about the number of veteran suicides, for example, that are happening every year. And if the Drug Enforcement Administration, when they made MDMA illegal in 1985, they did that on an emergency basis. We were in the middle of a lawsuit against the DEA, what's called an administrative law judge lawsuit. And we were challenging this arguments for making it into a Schedule I drug. And we actually won the case.
Wow.
The judge said it should be Schedule III, which means it should be available as a medicine, but it should be illegal otherwise for recreational use. But administrative law judges only give advice to the agencies that they're working in. They don't compel. You have to get out of that into the civil courts. So the judge said Schedule III, and the Drug Enforcement Administration said, no way, we're not going to do that. And their rationale was so wrong, so we sued them in the appeals court. What they said initially was that only the FDA could make a drug into a medicine, not the DEA. But the law was clear that it could be the Attorney General could do that. So the appeals court, when they review agencies' decisions, they don't tell them what to do. They say, you did something wrong, now rethink it. So then the DEA said, okay, we're going to rethink it. And then they came up with a new reason why they were against it. And this was this 8-part standard that was essentially the same as the FDA. So then we sued them again the second time. And we won again in the appeals courts. And so they went back to the DEA and said, you have to come up with another rationale. This one doesn't work either.
Oh, my God.
And then they came up with a 5-part standard that was sufficiently different but still had phase 3 studies. So it's essentially the same as FDA approval. And finally, the courts upheld that. And that's, during this process, it was clear to me that the DEA would not do anything to make this available as a medicine, that we would have to go through the FDA. And that's where MAPS began as a nonprofit psychedelic pharmaceutical company focused entirely on donations, and the intention was to turn it into a generic drug. That, because MDMA had been invented by Merck in 1912, it was in the public domain, it was used as a therapy drug before I even knew about it. And then it turned out that the emergency scheduling that DEA did in 1985 was itself illegal. It turned out that the Congress had given the Attorney General the power to emergency schedule drugs, but the Attorney General had never subdelegated that power down to the DEA. So they didn't have the authority to do that. So the people that got busted in the first year were all let go once their lawyers figured this out. So,
oh, wow.
So the first move to criminalize MDMA was a crime, you could say.
Wow.
But we're stuck. And so when we think about if MDMA had not been criminalized, how many people's lives would have been saved? How many people would have been able to benefit from psychedelics? That's one of the things that we're going to be talking about at the Psychedelic Science 2025 conference, the 16th to the 20th in June in Denver. We have over 500 speakers. We had over 1,500 applications. There's an enormous amount of research taking place with psychedelics, with psilocybin, with ibogaine, with MDMA, with 5-MeO-DMT, with a whole host. And the healing potential of these are incredible, and yet they've been kept away from people by these prohibitionist laws. And so it's enormously frustrating and tragic. And yet, if we let that overwhelm us, then we're not going to work as hard to make it happen. So I've had to learn how to deal with that frustration.
Well, it's just a gross distortion of the legal system. You know, there's no reason why they should be illegal. As long as you have whiskey and you can get Adderall easily on a prescription, like, and oxycodone is readily prescribed, like, this is crazy.
Well, it's counterproductive.
Yes.
It's not even, you know, like, stopping a lot of the benefits. It's actually creating more harms. Just as one example, my father was a pediatrician. He's no longer alive, but he worked on the first study with crack babies. He and his partners did the pediatric evaluation.
Oy.
And you remember this in the 80s. This idea was that there's going to be this whole generation of super predators, and these women that were pregnant with crack were having babies that were addicted, and they were going to be mentally deficient and prone to violence, and this whole scenario that Reagan amplified.
Right.
And what my father and his partners found out was that that really these kids could recover, that they could do better, that it was mostly malnutrition, poverty. It's not like fetal alcohol syndrome, that it was really not this direct connection between the crack cocaine and the problems with these kids. But what he found was that the women that were pregnant and were addicted were driven away
Your
from...
fucking phone is dinging again, man. Just put it on Do Not Disturb.
Yeah, let me just turn it off.
All you boomers and your goddamn gadgets.
Boomers. Yeah. But he found that these women were dissuaded from seeking treatment.
Why?
Because they were worried that they would have their babies taken away from them, because they were worried they were going to go to jail. So the drug war is counterproductive in that the people that need the help the most are driven away from seeking it because of the stigma and shame and criminality.
Right. But then they screw up sometimes and do like what Portland did, where they just go, everybody just do whatever you want. And then, unfortunately, you've already set a culture where you've allowed people to do fentanyl in the street and meth and whatever else they want. And then the laws pass where you decriminalize everything. It's legal free-for-all.
Yeah.
And then, unfortunately, you have chaos. And then they pulled back the law because it was just too much. People were going there just so they could get high.
Well, that's the important point, what you just said. People were going there. So what that means is that, and we saw this in Zurich. So there was a place in Zurich multiple decades ago called Needle Park, where they decided to provide access to healthcare, access to safe injection sites, things like this for heroin addicts and others in Zurich. And it was working because when you treat people as humans like that, they will often seek other treatment. And then if they're not necessarily criminals, but then people come from all over and overwhelm the capacity because it's this one humane site. And then it became an open air drug market. Just people from all over Europe started coming, and then they had the backlash.
Yeah.
So I think it's something somewhat similar in Portland, where you try some of these things on a local basis, but then it attracts people from all over, and then it turns into the opposite of what they'd hoped.
Right. Yeah, and I just think also they had gone through the whole defund the police thing, so they were just overwhelmed by cases, and the Portland's just out of control. It was a lovely place a few years ago, just a lovely place. 10 years ago, Portland was amazing. It's all a bunch of sweethearts and hippies. They were like so calm, and something happened, and people got radicalized, and then the tents, the camping on the street.
Yeah.
Once that happened, and you tolerated people just putting tents up in the middle of the city, it's like, don't ignore these people. Like, either help them out, or tell them they have to move, or do something. You can't just clog up your city with mentally ill drug addicts who are in tents. That's crazy.
It is, and it's hard to have these local solutions, because it attracts those people.
Exactly.
So
people probably got on trains to go to Portland and get high.
They did. So these kind of solutions, I think people take the wrong idea from them, that the solution itself was the wrong idea. But I think it's when you do it on a local basis like that and not have it widely distributed. So basically the idea is that you have people that have problems with substance abuse of all kinds. We don't criminalize people who are alcoholics. They can go to AA, they can go to other things. They're not stigmatized, and they're not worried that they're going to be arrested.
Right.
And yet they can go for help, and you have a lot of people that actually do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's the kind of humane approach. But
that's where we should be leaning as a society. That's a healthy, intelligent society. And also, we should be paying attention to the people that report great benefits. Like, there's just too many. Well, luckily we have guys like Rick Perry. And Rick Perry, who was the Republican governor of Texas, is now really in full support of this Ibogaine initiative. It's wonderful.
Yes, well, Rick Perry will be speaking at the conference.
Fantastic.
As
Love
will
that guy.
Brian
Such a nice
Hubbard.
guy. Love Brian Hubbard, too.
The work that you did to have Rick Perry and Brian Hubbard on your show, and how much that brought attention to the Ibogaine possibilities, was incredible.
Well, it's my feeling is, if a guy like Rick Perry, who's this like straight-nosed, conservative, right-wing kind of a guy, if he can open up his eyes to that and open up his heart to that, it's available for everybody. And there's this very binary position that people take in regards to their thoughts on psychedelics. It's either it's for losers and people that want to escape reality, or if you're on the side of the people that have experienced it, you don't get any of that, which is so weird for me. So the people that think that it's for losers and it's all just a bunch of people just trying to escape reality and they're lazy and None of those people saying that have ever done it. So if you can get just a few of them to do it and tell their friends, if we had like legitimate therapy centers, because everybody needs a little help.
Yes.
I'm not saying you need to get off heroin, I'm not saying you're coming back from Afghanistan. I'm not saying anything crazy, but like everybody could use just a little therapeutic help to give you a fresh perspective. And I think if that was available to a lot of people that are just generally depressed, I think we could change the tone of the country. I really do. Because one of the things that bums me out the most about, especially the interactions that people have on social media, is like it's all negative. It's all negative. You're living in these rare moments. You have a finite amount of time. 100 years is so quick. It goes by so fast. And you're wasting it, yelling at people on Twitter. For what? For what? Like
right.
Commenting on things all day long in anger and disgust and look where this country is. Like, what are you talking about? Everyone's perspective needs a little help, needs a little pick-me-up, just a little something to go, I think we're okay. I think we're going to be okay.
I think that there are so many possible benefits from having psychedelic clinics all over.
All over, yeah.
I mean, we're talking about right now there's several thousand ketamine clinics. But one of the issues with ketamine clinics is that many of them provide ketamine without therapy.
Whoops.
So
I met a lot of those people.
Yeah, yes. So I think the key point is that when we talk about psychedelics, when we talk about the clinics, it's not here, take this pill.
Right.
It's here, take this pill in a therapeutic context with therapists there to help you
Right.
process the emotions.
With an expert, someone who's experienced it themselves, who can help you.
Yeah, and then with the therapy afterwards,
Yeah.
which we call the integration process. So it's not just the experience itself, it's the preparation to be open
Right.
to whatever happens. It's the experience. And then I just was the other day with a woman, Doblin, who is a neuroscientist. And what she's talked about and what she's discovered is that psychedelics are these rare substances that have they'll open up what they call the critical periods. So it's neuroplasticity. It's this ability to rewire your brain that stays for sometimes weeks or longer. With Ibogaine, it can be several months after you have the experience. So that the therapy that happens afterwards, the work that you do to integrate it, has special potential to make long-term changes in your behavior, in your brain circuitry. And so psychedelics are unique among substances. People are trying to develop non-psychedelic psychedelics that do have this neuroplasticity property, but they open up this potential for long-term change if you do the therapy afterwards, if you focus on trying to, what the insights that you had during the experience, and then try to make them into permanent behavior patterns.
That's really fascinating. It's also so typically human that we try to develop non-psychedelic versions of the same thing. Like we can do better than nature.
Yeah.
God was onto something, but he had an early plan. It wasn't really fleshed out yet.
Right. Well, one of the things that was really impactful for Rick Perry was Morgan Luttrell, who's now a member of Congress.
Right.
And so Morgan had very terrible trauma from his military service and eventually was able to experience Ibogaine. And from that, he was able to get a lot better. And there's a researcher, Nolan Williams, who will also be at the conference, who's done work with Ibogaine and a lot of the Navy SEALs and others that have gone down to Mexico, and he's done studies of their brains with traumatic brain injury, and has shown before and after that some of them actually do have this recovery from traumatic brain injury.
Yeah, it's pretty phenomenal. It's also helps people with other neurological disorders, like it's helped people with Parkinson's, right?
Yes, and that is where it could make sense in certain ways to have non-psychedelic psychedelics.
Right,
So-
but also, why not? If Ibogaine's working, just
Well,
get
yeah.
him on that. You
Yeah.
already have Parkinson's. What, are you scared?
Well, and then
Scared
you,
to-
and then you get the insights though as well.
Yes.
So,
yes.
but there's people that might not want that. It's difficult. It can be.
But why do they not want it? They don't want it because of propaganda. They don't want it because someone, there's the stories of like Sid Barrett from Pink Floyd, or
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
the stories of people losing their mind. And that's what people are terrified of. I think with some people, honestly, that's a valid point. Now that you're saying that, there's a bunch of people that are like very psychologically vulnerable, and maybe a profound psychedelic experience wouldn't be tenable. They wouldn't be able to handle it. You know, that's possible. There's a bunch of people that they're in a bad state. Maybe they're on a ton of medication just keeping them stable. They can't do psychedelics. Maybe a non-psychedelic version of that rewired their brain would be beneficial. Now that I think about it.
Yeah, there is actually a situation with cluster headaches. So cluster headaches are like suicide headaches. They're worse than migraines. And there was, this is now back around 2003, a bunch of the people who had cluster headaches, one of them went to a party, did mushrooms, and found that it postponed the cycle and would interrupt the cycle of these cluster headaches, which are terrible. And so they contacted me, and they formed this group called Cluster Busters. And they said, we don't want to be criminals anymore. We would like to study this. Can you help us study this? And I live in Boston right next to McLean Hospital, which is a part of Harvard Medical School. And I approached them and I said, would you want to study these people with cluster headaches? And they said, sure, this is really interesting. So they brought in all these people and checked their medical records and determined that this was really the case, that psilocybin and LSD blocked cluster headache cycle and postponed the next cycle. And so we did all this research, and then the next step would have been to actually give LSD or psilocybin to people with cluster headaches. And the people at Harvard, like, oh, Timothy Leary, he was here, we don't want to do this, you know.
Damn it,
so,
MK Ultra.
All of that.
They ruined it for everybody.
Well, we're trying to get over that, but they did. And but then the people at Harvard said, well, we will do this LSD or psilocybin, but only if it's the last resort, only if everything else fails. So the scientists, Torsten Passy and John Halpern, decided that they would use a non-psychedelic version of LSD called bromo LSD. And the plan was that they would give this bromo LSD to a bunch of people with cluster headaches. It would not work. And then they would come back and say, hey, we need to do this LSD and psilocybin research. So I said, okay, that makes sense. We have no idea why LSD or psilocybin works, but it's probably connected to the psychedelic properties of it. Mm-hmm. And so they did this study at Hanover University in Germany, and I kept waiting for the results, and they wouldn't, I heard nothing. And then after months, they finally said, we didn't want to tell you, but the bromo LSD works even better than the LSD and the psilocybin, because with LSD, it's effective in micrograms. For psilocybin, you take 25 milligrams for a major trip. But with bromo LSD, you can give large amounts of it because you're not getting high. And whatever it does, it's still a mystery what it does in the brain, but it works better. You just flood the brain. So that's actually a good example of a non-psychedelic psychedelic for a physiological problem that could make sense as a medicine.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense with the dose, especially.
Yeah.
But that's great, though. At least that way, we found something out.
Yeah. And actually, when they finally told me that it worked and that they didn't want to tell me, I said, I'm interested in psychedelic therapy. If I'm also what's best for patients, so that if this bromo LSD is best for patients, that's great. It's not upsetting me at all because we're talking about it anyway for a physiological thing, and I'm interested in the therapy part of it. And so, unfortunately, talk about being frustrating. Kerry Turnbull is a philanthropist, and he's trying to make bromo LSD into a medicine, but he's been unable to raise all the funds that he needs to do that. And so this was a treatment for a terrible disorder that was identified over about 20 years ago, and it's still not been made into a medicine.
God damn.
And so those are the things that are frustrating because it's not even psychedelic.
Right. That's crazy. It's just too close to psychedelic.
Yeah.
It's too related by,
so
by association.
Yeah. So Morgan Drell was a big example to educate Rick Perry. Morgan will be at the conference. Congressman Jack Bergman, who's leading an effort in Washington to have a group that's trying to collect a lot of support, bipartisan support, to make psychedelics into medicines. Will be there.
The military aspect of it is very important because they're generally very right-wing guys. and women. You
Yeah.
know, like
Yeah.
they serve their country. They're hard-nosed, disciplined people.
Yeah.
If they can't experience it, they can realize, you know. I've always said that, like, I try to act as a bridge between the meatheads and the potheads. 'Cause
You are a good bridge for that.
I'm the bridge.
Here I am.
Because-
You know what Timothy Leary said, which is phenomenal? And tell me if this is true for you.
Okay.
He said, if you want to be a bridge, you have to get used to being stepped on.
Oh, that's for sure. Yeah, I'm pretty used to being stepped on. Yeah. But I mean, not necessarily for those positions. Because the idea of pot and a lot of these other things is that it makes you lazy. And you'd have a really hard time convincing anybody that I'm lazy. That's very hard. I'm pretty disciplined. I don't believe that's the case. I don't think it's just, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. Like you have to have either discipline or be able to enjoy expanding your consciousness. I think, in fact, it enhances your perspective, which enhances the understanding of the value of discipline and hard work, and of honesty, and of like doing things the right way. Like you do things the right way, you genuinely feel better. And if you ever have trips, like whatever, even in the sensory deprivation tank, like sober, getting in there, they're better when you live the right way. You don't have any demons, or as many. You don't have any regrets. You don't have do the right thing. You could be a good person. Like it's not that hard to do. And the fact that it's been conflated with laziness and ne'er-do-wells and all that stuff, like that's nonsense. Some of the most ambitious people I know smoke weed. Some of the most hard-working, interesting, creative people I know smoke weed. They enjoy it.
Well, one of the best examples is Carl Sagan.
Yes. One of the best examples.
And
yes.
he had to hide that, though,
He
for
did.
decades because he was worried he would lose his security clearances.
I was trying to tell that to someone who was a scientist once off air, and they didn't believe me. I'm like, how do you not know? How do you not know Carl Sagan was a huge pot smoker?
Right. Well, Lester Grinspoon was the doctor at Harvard Medical School, who was one of my mentors, and he was close personal friends with Carl Sagan. And Lester was an expert on medical marijuana. And he had a book about experiences with marijuana. Carl Sagan had to tell his story under a pseudonym.
Wow.
Because he didn't really want to be known for that. But
well, it's a different time period, and that's why guys like him are so brave. Just to talk about it at all. You could risk everything. He was the guy explaining science and astronomy to everybody and explaining the cosmos. We found out that guy's a stoner. Like, oh, it's all out the window now.
Oh, yeah, and his wife, Andrian, was on the board of directors of the NORML, to legalize marijuana,
Crazy.
the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws.
It's very frustrating for me because when I was a young man, I remember thinking that eventually all this will be worked out. And, by the time I'm 35 or something like that, there won't be any more drug laws about things that are beneficial. I really did believe that. Now I'm 57. I'm like, oh my God, it's not changing. Oh my God, this shit's taken forever. It's been decades of everyone knowing, decades of the internet. Before the internet, you could kind of propaganda was very effective, the reefer madness stuff and all that craziness that they pumped into people's heads. Like, that was the 1930s, man, and that's still effective today. There's still people today that believe all that stuff.
Well, you just shared with me before we started talking about the Texas law that's trying to, if you could maybe share a bit about that.
Ken Paxton, who I've met, I like him, very nice guy. I don't know why he did this, but Austin had decriminalized marijuana. So apparently the Attorney General's office sued Austin. And what is the ruling on that? I don't know if they even have acted on this or if they're going to appeal or what it is. But, here's the thing about something that's not fully legal. And I've talked about this before, so I apologize to anybody who's heard this. John Norris, who's a friend of mine, who's been on the podcast, who was a game warden in California. And he found a diverted stream, and they were trying to figure out what's going on. They figured some farmer fucked up, and, what's going on here, and, fish were dead. And so he's a game warden, so they have to track down what happened with this stream. Finds this huge grow-op in the middle of the national forest, run by the cartel. And then his entire operation in the decades future becomes a tactical force with bulletproof vests and dogs and guns fighting the cartel. in the forest, in national forest, because they were growing it all in America and then just selling it. Like 90%, I believe he said 90% of the marijuana that was sold in states where it's illegal was coming from California. And they were using very dangerous pesticides and herbicides, stuff that's completely illegal if you were growing it naturally, if you were growing it normally. And because it's illegal, you have organized crime that's providing it to people. Like, if it was legal, we could only buy it from, like, you buy your fucking groceries, you buy organic fruit, right? You buy organic vegetables. You buy organic marijuana. You would know the people who are growing it. You could meet the farmers, just like you can meet people from White Oak Pastures. You'd meet people from fucking Happy Green Farm. And you would know where you're getting your stuff. You know there's no fentanyl in it, which is apparently they're talking about that now.
Yeah.
You're not helping anybody. You're only hurting people. Now, if your goal is just to hurt as many people as possible, yeah, make more laws. Yeah, keep locking people up. Lock people up for things that don't hurt anybody, even themselves.
Well, the other part of it is the tax money.
Yes.
Too. When you're letting all this money go to the underground, to the cartels, to the criminal gangs, alternatively, you could have it as taxes, and it could make it easier on the rest of us.
I could see as an argument, if you were the Attorney General and you said you are propping up organized crime by allowing it to be decriminalized, and the people that are growing it and selling it in Austin, or the people that have it in Austin, are all committing crime, so they're probably cartel people, I could see that argument, kind of. But you know what the fucking solution to that is? Make it legal. This is dumb. We can just buy whiskey anywhere, which I love. Nothing wrong with it. But you can go buy. I have a bar. You know, I'm a drug dealer. Literally, I'm a drug dealer. I have a bar. I own a bar. I sell drugs. Alcohol's a fucking drug. It's just a sanctioned legal drug that we pay taxes for. And the Alcohol Commission has to check, make sure we're doing everything right. But it's drugs. And it's way more dangerous.
And prohibition of alcohol, actually, in the 20s, led to organized crime in America.
Yes. Al Capone. All that stuff. Propped up organized crime. What also led to NASCAR, too, though. You know? Pretty cool. They figured out how to soup up some cars to get away from the cops.
Right.
That's what NASCAR came from. Did you know that?
Yeah.
It's amazing. But it's so dumb. It's so and everyone who enjoys a little alcohol with a drink at a social gathering, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. Let people do what the fuck they want to do. We're all going to die someday. And if people are having good or bad experiences on any of these substances, it's up to them to manage their experiences. Like, I don't get along with alcohol. I won't drink alcohol. I don't get along with marijuana. I don't want to try it. Okay, good. That's okay. It's all fine. But, let people who enjoy it have it. It's dumb.
Well, this idea that we're all going to die one day, one of the most important uses of psychedelics is to help people at the end of life who are scared of dying.
Right.
And also for palliative care. So there's a lot of research that's been done with people with life-threatening illnesses who are anxious about dying and have received either MDMA or psilocybin or LSD in the 60s.
Yeah.
So that the kind of big fears that we have about illness and death, when people are not able to process those fears, it just gets worse and worse.
I wonder how many people Larry Hagman turned on. You know what I mean? That day on CNN, there's probably millions of people watching Larry Hagman saying, well, I'm not afraid of death because I had an LSD experience and I realized that it's all just connected.
Yeah. Well, if it wasn't for my mother-in-law reading his book,
wild,
and he became a big supporter of MAPS and he spoke out in public. Those are the kind of dialogues that change people's minds.
Yeah.
There's been some, we have a lot of, I live in Massachusetts where marijuana is legal. Marijuana is legal in California and Colorado and all these states. They're doing really well economically.
Oh, it's a huge tax boom. Especially, Colorado had the craziest taxes. When it was 39% or something at one point? And everybody's like, okay. Because it's, first of all, economically, if you want to go out for a night drinking, that's going to cost you $200. Buying a round of drinks for your friends, a round of drinks here, there. Yeah. It's you a couple $100 worth of marijuana, you're stoned for a month.
Yeah.
Like you're just stoned forever. And if you have to pay 39% tax, like okay, like I hope it fixes streets. Like I'll give you my tax money. I'm not scared of paying I want to pay taxes if you were doing good stuff with it. Is it helping pay for the schools? Great. Let's get great schools and a lot of people smoking weed legally, but not kids. You know, that's the other thing. Like, we need education for children to let them know, like, it's not good to alter your state of consciousness, especially on a regular basis when you're young. There's some developmental issues that come along with abuse.
Well, this is with abuse, for sure.
Abuse,
definitely for sure. One of the things that's pretty interesting is look at the cultures that have successfully integrated psychedelics, like, for example, the ayahuasca churches that are in Brazil, or the Native American church that uses peyote, often for Native Americans that have problems with alcohol. I was out on a Navajo reservation, this is about 20 years ago, and it was for a Native American church peyote ceremony, and one of the Navajo men brought his 9-year-old son to take peyote and spend the night with us.
Whoa.
And
peyote's mescaline, right?
Peyote's mescaline, yeah. And Wachuma is from San Pedro, cactuses also that has mescaline in it. But this 9-year-old did not take the same amount of peyote as the rest of us, but he took more appropriate for his body weight. And it's within a cultural context, within a family context, within a religious supportive context, these cultures tend not to have age limits.
Right.
So I think when you talk about the developmental problems that come from abuse, that's totally the case.
Well,
but when you talk about occasional use for inspiration, particularly when
in a ceremonial
setting,
yeah,
which has been for centuries and centuries, they've refined it. There's no neurological damage that comes to your brain from mescaline.
Right. Ceremonial settings are very important, and I used to think it was foolishness. I think ceremonies, like, get the fuck out of here with your ceremony. I was cynical, you know, but I think that. And even rites of passages, like into adulthood, I used to think that was foolish too. But then I realized, like, wow, a lot of people have a hard time determining if that they're an adult, and they stay kind of infantile for their entire life. And especially someone that's like really coddled by their parents and overprotected helicopter parents. You never develop the ability to be solitary and just to be out there on your own and autonomous. And things that are important should be treated with respect. And that's where I think ceremony comes in.
Yeah, one of the things that I think has led to my interest in lifetime use of psychedelics was been the failure of my bar mitzvah to actually turn me into a man.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Because I'm the oldest.
You thought you were going to be a man. That's it. I'm going to be a man.
I wanted to avoid all the awkwardness of adolescence. I'm the oldest of 4 kids. So I had no older siblings to tell me. And we did this rite of passage, and it's been used for thousands of years. And I just had this idea that there would be some visitation from God of some way, that I would be one thing the morning of my bar mitzvah, and I would be something different the next morning. And I remember waking up in bed the next morning after my bar mitzvah, and I'm like, I'm the same. This particular rite of passage didn't work. And you know, you're 13, you're not so smart. And I was like, well, you know, God must be busy. A lot of people got bar mitzvah. If you know, it's like Christmas, and you're
eventually God's going to get to me.
Yeah, and so every day for a week, I would wake up and think, is today the day? Am I different?
Oh, wow.
Nothing happened. And then finally, another week and another bar mitzvah Saturday came along, and I realized that if I was on a list, I have now been dropped off the list completely because there's all these new people bar mitzvahed. And the rites of passage that we do have, I believe, probably worked in the past for a lot of people. And they did have this demarcation between different ages. People didn't used to live that long either. So 13 was kind of a transition point.
Right.
But it was when I was 17, almost 18, that I first did LSD. And one of my very first thoughts was, this is what my bar mitzvah should have been. Because, you know, you're like, who am I?
Right.
Where do I fit in?
Right.
I'm sort of, my ego sense is dissolving a bit from LSD. I'm connected to something bigger and larger than myself.
Right.
I thought, this is the courage, the test of courage. This is the test of manhood. This is something that is a part of a rite of passage. So for me, the psychedelics became the rite of passage when the religious rite of passage didn't have the same impact as I had hoped it would.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. It's interesting too that you talk about not restricting it for young people. And I thought about like wine in Europe. Because kids in Europe, particularly kids in Italy, they don't have the drinking problem that kids have in America. When high school kids in America get a hold of alcohol, they get drunk and ridiculous, and like because they're doing something naughty.
Yeah.
But kids are normalized to the just regular consumption of a glass of wine with dinner. It's normal.
Well, and then in the U.S., where when kids do experiment, because they're worried about being caught with things, they
Right.
tend to not use wine, but they tend to use stronger drinks.
Right.
So
Right.
they call that sort of the iron law of prohibition, that when you prohibit something, it moves more and more to more concentrated, more powerful forms of that drug.
Hence fentanyl.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, or even cocaine when
Right.
if you could have coca-tea. I mean, Andy Weil has been promoting for decades and decades this idea of coca-tea. If
Yeah, I
you,
had that once.
what was the,
I
what did
couldn't
it
shut
feel
the
like?
fuck up. I couldn't shut up. I was like, oh my God, thank God I've never done cocaine. I was telling my friend Doug, I was like, I don't think I could shut up. But it wasn't anything crazy. I think that chewing the leaves is supposed to be like super beneficial and actually even healthier than coffee.
Yeah, there's a lot of nutrition in the leaves. It
Doesn't
helps.
it fuck your teeth up though?
Well, if you do anything too much, it can, but it's
You
something
sound like an apologist. You sound like
well, I think it's this idea that appropriate use. Well, Paracelsus is the one of the early physicians, and he said the difference between a medicine and a poison is dose.
right. Well, yeah, salt will kill you. You know, eat a pound of salt, see what happens.
Water will kill you.
Yeah,
I mean,
drink,
people
drink too much water. Yeah.
Yeah, hyponatremia. You dilute your.
I remember a
Your blood.
lady died because she was trying to win a PlayStation for a kid at a morning radio show. She was trying to drink the most water.
Oh.
Crazy. Yeah, like no, who knew? I guess no one knew then. But people are pretty aware now because of frat parties, like, you know, hazing. They've had kids do that,
Yeah, that's one of the things
which is
that
nuts.
has
You could
been
die from water.
has been happening in terms of the raves and ecstasy use, so that occasionally people will overheat and die from MDMA, where you dance all night, you don't drink
Right.
adequate fluid, and you can get hyperthermia, and there are some cases. So that's one of the dangers of ecstasy use outside of therapeutic context. And so people have heard, okay, now I need to drink fluids in order to not overheat, and there have been cases of people that have died from drinking too much water.
Well, I can counter that because there's a bunch of people that have died from too much exercise. There's something called rhabdomyolysis that people get when you over-exercise, where your protein starts breaking down, your kidneys can't process it. You start peeing brown, and it can be totally deadly. You can push
Yeah.
yourself too hard and die from exercise too.
Yeah.
How many people every year die of rhabdo? Google that, because I know it's very common in the CrossFit world because people are competitive with exercise, which is not necessarily the great. Like a lot of people I know that are trainers do not like the concept of CrossFit because it's doing exercises that are just supposed to strengthen your body and condition your body, but doing them in a competition setting where it's like unlimited amount of repetitions, as many as you can get in, you know, X amount of time, or, you know, and then they have these games where people play where they might not be conditioned enough to sustain the workload that they're putting forth, and then they get rhabdo. And it's fairly common. Like I know multiple people that have had rhabdo.
Wow.
Yeah. How many people die?
So it doesn't say that, but it says there's 26,000 cases reported annually, and about 5% of those lead to mortality, 5 to 20%.
That's a lot. That's a lot of people that's probably more than people drink water and die. I guarantee it's
Probably.
more. I bet drinking water, so much water you die, is probably fairly rare. But I think that rhabdo stuff is super dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah, you're reminding me of something funny. David Nutt was the drug policy advisor for the British government, and he did a ranking of all the dangers of all these different drugs. And what he found was that the psychedelics were at the very low end of the dangers. And so he talked about how horseback riding was more dangerous than ecstasy.
Oh, yeah. It's super dangerous, man. People fall and break things all the time.
Yeah, and so he got fired for that because he was telling the truth. He was making people love horseback riding in England.
Oh, that's crazy.
So what MAPS did is that we
You got
did it-
fired for telling the truth.
Well, he was the drug policy advisor saying things that people did not want to hear.
maybe he should have like got his job description down before he started yapping. Like, what am I trying to do here for real?
Well,
like, you really want to know my opinion, or do I have an angle that I'm supposed to be headed towards? Can you guide me?
Yeah. So we did something similar. We looked at cheerleading.
Oh yeah.
And we looked at the emergency room visits on a per person visit for the percentage of people that do cheerleading that go to the emergency room versus the percentage of people that do ecstasy. And cheerleading is more dangerous.
Oh yeah, they fly through the air, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, they bang heads sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. So we had a poster that we made. It said, "Give me an E."
Oh God, that's so silly. But here's the thing: it's like we allow multiple dangerous things. Like horseback riding is one thing. How about bull riding? Totally legal, super dangerous, like super duper dangerous. I mean, we allow BMX riding. You should, of course, allow that. Look, I'm a martial artist. Like, you know how many people have accidentally died doing martial arts? A ton. It's real. You know, there's a ton of activities that people enjoy. Skydiving, they enjoy bungee jumping. Legal, all legal. Amusement parks, legal.
Yeah. Well, I think that in those circumstances, people believe that there's benefits that outweigh the risks.
Amusement parks?
Well, people enjoy them.
Oh, people enjoy psychedelics.
Yeah, but I think that's the critical issue is that people have got, as you started out by saying, you know, people think that if you take these drugs, there's no benefits, you're hallucinating, you're running away from reality, you're not paying attention to what's really going on, you're making yourself more vulnerable, you're going to fly out a window and think you can fly.
Well, it's just like we need a comprehensive addressing of the actual real landscape of what these things are, what the benefits are, and just this addressing of the impact of propaganda. The sweeping Schedule I Act of 1970,
Right.
The whole William Randolph Hearst connection to marijuana illegalization, which was right after alcohol prohibition, so they were looking to put these agents back out into the field. All that needs to be like comprehensively explained to the American public to reinform people, because I think people are they have the general population that doesn't listen to podcasts like this and doesn't get online and search these things. You have these conceptions that are entirely formed by propaganda, and they're not based on real anecdotal experiences, real science, real data. And also the problem with that too is there's real side effects of some of these things. Those need to be understood. How do you understand them? Well, you have to make them legal and do tests and studies. And maybe people have gene expressions that, you know, maybe they shouldn't be doing this thing, but they can do that thing, you know?
Yeah, I think this idea that, for me, how do we break through the wall of propaganda?
Right.
And for me, the idea has been we go to where the suffering is, we go to where the science is, and we try to make things first into medicines. And I think that's where people are willing to listen. Mm-hmm. When you have all this propaganda and all these fears, it has to be that there's some corresponding benefit that overwhelms your sense of fear that you're willing to take a look.
Right.
And that's where you go to where the suffering is. And that's where with post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yes.
I think one of the things that we've been able to do remarkably is with psychedelics, they're one of the few things that are out of the culture wars these days. There's bipartisan support for psychedelic research. And it's because we went to where a lot of the suffering was, sympathetic patients. Most of the people in our studies are women survivors of sexual abuse. Most of the people with PTSD are women. But most of the media attention goes to the veterans. And people put veterans on a pedestal. And if so many of them, you know, there's different estimates, but it's, 18, 22 or more per day commit suicide. And you can end up avoiding a lot of that by helping them process the traumas that they experience.
And again, it's like we were talking about before, it's the bridge.
Yeah.
That's the real bridge. The bridge is these, hard-nosed, right-wing guys who have these experiences, become better parents, become better friends, just like reintegrate into society, make peace with the past. It's totally possible, and that these tools are being so underutilized to so many vulnerable and needy people. So many people just fucking need some help.
Yeah. One of the speakers at the Psychedelic Science Conference is Sharif El-Nahal, who was the undersecretary of the VA.
Wow.
And he's become very passionate about what he's seen from those people that have done the veterans that have done MDMA-assisted therapy inside the Veterans Administration. But it took MAPS 25 years, starting in 1995, we were offering money to the VA to do MDMA research, until 2021, when the first veteran received MDMA inside the VA from VA therapists.
Wow.
So talk about frustration. Think about the number of people that have committed suicide
Right.
from when we started offering to the VA to do it. But it was the propaganda, it was the stigma that made it so that they were not willing to do it. What's most amazing today is that Congress gave $10 million to the Department of Defense for MDMA-assisted therapy research in active duty soldiers.
Oh, wow.
So there's a $4.9 million grant that went to Dr. Aaron Wolfgang at Walter Reed, and it's going to be giving MDMA-assisted therapy. There's another $4.9 million grant that went to a group called Strong Star that's in San Antonio, here in Texas, elsewhere, and they're connected with Emory University. And so they're going to combine MDMA with a therapy called prolonged exposure, where you talk about the trauma over and over. But that's very re-traumatizing. There was a study that the Veterans Administration did that took them about 6 years. It was 916 veterans, and it compared two therapies that they use, both non-drug therapies for treating PTSD. One was called prolonged exposure. The other was cognitive processing therapy. And what they showed is that around half the people are in the study drop out because the therapy itself is re-traumatizing.
Oh, God.
Because you're just forced to go over the trauma, over and over, and that's supposed to desensitize you. And if you can stay in it, it can be helpful, but it re-traumatizes so many people. So what we've shown is working with the MDMA with the veterans is that they're able to process the trauma, that the fear reduction from the MDMA, reducing activity in the amygdala, the fear processing part of our brain, that you can, once you can approach these things that have felt like will tear you apart, that they'll be overwhelming, you can't really go away from them, but they never really leave either, that then you can process it. So this study that will be done here in Texas with active duty soldiers, again, is going to be a combination of MDMA with prolonged exposure. The Walter Reed study is combining MDMA with what they call acceptance and commitment therapy, different kind of approaches.
How do they decide which approach?
Well, this is going to be research trying to different kinds
so there's going to be do multiple ones and just see what's the most effective.
Yeah, and I think that MAPS has started funding studies combining MDMA with cognitive processing therapy as well. But the one that I think is the most, potentially the most valuable is called cognitive behavioral conjoint therapy. Conjoint means couples or dyads. And so what happens is the designated patient, the veteran with PTSD, is where the attention is focused. But when they have PTSD, it affects their families, it affects their partners. And so cognitive behavioral conjoint therapy was developed by this woman, Candace Monson, at the Boston VA. And that's where they bring in the partner as well as the veteran, and they both get therapy. And so back in 2014, when finally I was working with Richard Rockefeller and his cousin, Senator Jay Rockefeller, who was on the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, and they finally convinced the VA to be willing to let MAPS support research with MDMA. They said that they would not let it, they wouldn't refer veterans, they couldn't do it inside the VA, we had to pay for it, but that the first thing they wanted us to do was combine MDMA with cognitive behavioral conjoint therapy, where both people now get MDMA. And the results were better than anything they've ever got before in studying this therapy, both in reduction of PTSD, but also in strength of the relationship.
Do they combine it with 5-HTP or anything like that to sort of bring back your levels?
The answer is no. People do use 5-HTP, and it can be helpful, but...
Can you explain what that does?
Yeah, so 5-HTP is your precursor for serotonin. So when we started research with the FDA, this was now 1992, the very first time that they permitted MDMA research was 1992. And as I said, MDMA had been used as a therapy drug since the middle 70s through the 80s, criminalized in 85. And people have felt that sometimes, and I think it's very much the case, that you're tired after MDMA, that people talk about as serotonin depletion.
Right.
And so when you take 5-HTP, that can be helpful. But when we started with the FDA, they said, all this information that you've got from before, from underground use or from before when it was still legal, doesn't matter to us, really. Everything has to be done under direct supervision of FDA-approved studies. And they said, don't assume that you're going to have problems and you're going to use MDMA plus 5-HTP or something. Just start with the MDMA, see what problems you get, and then you can start. So the way we think,
makes sense.
the way we think about MDMA therapy is that it's really not a one-day thing, it's a two-day, in the sense that the second day is for rest, it's for having no obligations, no appointments, and the therapists come back and do more integrative therapy the next day. And also, we do the therapy during the day. It starts at 10 in the morning. It's an 8-hour session, so often people can get sleep that night. And we don't see more low mood or more tiredness in the people that get MDMA than in the people that got therapy without MDMA. So we were never felt that the need to introduce 5-HTP. We didn't have evidence of symptoms that required this. But I think it's because we talk about it as a two-day experience. The other part is that when people take MDMA at raves or parties and things like that, often they're drinking, they do it at night, they don't get full sleep.
Right.
The next day they don't just take the day off, often they go into activities.
Right.
And so
they're exhausted.
And they're exhausted.
Yeah,
And
makes
so
sense.
I think that this concept that we've developed is this really thinking about it as a two-day experience where there is this low energy and but it can be productive in terms of trying to work on the issues that came up during the MDMA experience or the PTSD or depression or whatever it is. Now, there's a project at a place called Sunstone, which is a therapy center outside in Rockville, Maryland. And they've worked with cancer patients who are anxious about dying, and they have brought in their partners to the therapy, and both of them get MDMA as well. So these are all under FDA-approved studies. And they found that that was tremendously effective as well, because when your partner has got a life-threatening illness, it doesn't just affect them, it affects you as well. And often the therapy is focused again on the designated patient. So this kind of broadening the sense of who it is that is going to be treated and bringing in people's partners, I think is going to be very important. One of the works, Marcus and Amber Capone, who've done work with vets, they've brought probably by now about 1,000 veterans down to Mexico for Ibogaine. And they have also started bringing their partners as well. They realize that you need to think about this as a family setting and to try to treat the entire family context. This raises another issue, which is to talk about group therapy. So the scale of the trauma, in America there's 13 million PTSD patients. This is the estimate by the Veterans Administration. You know, in Ukraine we've got an entire country. When I was there, practically every family knows someone or has someone that has been injured or killed. And so you've got massive population-based trauma. And to think about treating people as individuals is really important, but it's going to be hard to scale because of the limited number of therapists and psychiatrists and the cost of doing that. So the FDA has wanted all the research with LSD, psilocybin, MDMA, 5-MeO-DMT to start on an individual basis. But there's new studies now that are going to be working on group therapy. So one of the first in America was at the Portland, Oregon VA. And it was 4 therapists for 6 veterans. And it started out where each one got an individual session first, and then they got a group session. And there's 2 basic kinds of trauma in the military. One is war-related or accident training-related, and the other is what they call military sexual trauma. There's a lot of sexual abuse by veterans or by military active duty people of other people in the military, and they call that military sexual trauma. And so what they've learned is they have to separate those groups when they do the group therapy, because if you're a military person who's been abused by other people in the military, that you might not feel safe if you're in a context of group therapy. So they've done separate the groups, but they found that the groups do terrific with supporting each other afterwards in this integration process. And so what they've done is they've realized, though, that the design they had initially was an individual session and then a group session. And after they did 2 cohorts of the 6, they realized that the the people felt they needed a third MDMA session, and they wanted that also as a group, not as an individual. There's a project in Australia that's going to be climate-related PTSD from floods that they've had related to climate, and so they're going to be doing group therapy there. And there's an incredible project that's developing in Israel that's for people traumatized on October 7th. And there's going to be groups of 7 with 2 therapists, 2 assistants. But the Ministry of Health has taken a while to review this application. It's funded by charitable donations. The MDMA is coming from Canada. But what the Ministry of Health in Israel has wanted is, and this is the first study ever, where it's going to be direct comparison of individual therapy versus group therapy. So everybody is ready to have one or the other. You get randomized to either individual or group, and it will be a direct comparison. And so I think, like, when we think about AA and we think about peer support, I think you can go deeper when it's individual therapy because you have more focus. You're not thinking about other people. You can go deeper. But when you're in a group setting, you can kind of bond with the other people. You can kind of hear their other stories, but then you can support each other in this integration process. So I think at the end of it, it could be that the groups do just as well as the individuals. And then that will dramatically reduce the cost of the treatment and help it scale. So that's where we're at this initial thing. And I think particularly for military people that are traumatized in similar circumstances, that are bonded in groups, that group therapy can maybe even be the treatment of choice. But I think the way the FDA is going to be reviewing it is that there is going to be studies with individuals first that will have to be gone through the system and approved, and then there will be this additional research with groups. But,
What kind of a timeline are we talking about? Like, how long are these studies?
well, it's going to be about 3 years for the project in Israel. I mean, it's going to be about 160 people.
What about the projects here?
The project at the Portland, Oregon VA is going to be done pretty soon. But it's really just been 4 or 5 cohorts. It's very small numbers of people.
Okay.
And so there will need to be more. I think that there's been some efforts to do what people call in some ways a modified version of individual versus group, is that they've done some of this at Sunstone also, where there'll be 4 people getting psilocybin at the same time, but each in a separate room, each with 1 therapist. But then near the end of the session, they bring them together, and then they talk about what happened, and then they also have the group integration. So it's kind of a modified. So I think in terms of time frame, it's probably 4 or 5 years before FDA will approve group therapy, maybe longer. The other issue is that the last time that we spoke, it was before the FDA advisory committee and before the FDA meeting to decide whether to approve MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD. And the advisory committee recommended against it, and the FDA voted against it. This was August of last year. And so that was heartbreaking because I thought that the data really did justify approval, and it did demonstrate safety and efficacy. But there was enough doubts that were raised. One of the big problems to do research with psychedelics is how do you do a double-blind study?
Right.
You know, when you take a powerful drug, you know you've taken it. And if you give an inactive placebo, people can tell the difference. A lot of my dissertation, which I did in 2001, was how to do a double-blind study with psychedelics, particularly with MDMA. And my solution, which made sense, was to do therapy with low-dose MDMA versus therapy with full-dose MDMA. So everybody knows they're getting MDMA, they all have the same expectations, and they might not be aware, though, which dose. You know, is it a full dose, is it a lower dose? So the challenge was to pick the low dose so that it's high enough to cause a certain amount of confusion, but not so high that it has so much therapeutic potential that you can't tell a difference between the groups. So for 16 years, from 2000 to 2016, MAPS did a series of what are called phase 2 studies to try to figure out how to do phase 3. And we looked at therapy with no MDMA, therapy with 25 milligrams, 30 milligrams, 40, 50, 75, 100, 125, and 150. So it's sort of like a dose response. We did all these different doses. And what we discovered, fortunately after I'd got my PhD, was that my theory was partially right and partially wrong. That, a microdose of anything is not going to be very good as a placebo because you'll be able to tell. So what was surprising to us was that the lower doses, 25, 30, 40, 50 milligrams, did indeed cause a certain amount of confusion. But when you're working with PTSD patients and you get this activation from the drug, but you don't have enough of the fear reduction, it made people uncomfortable. So we showed that the people that got therapy with no MDMA did better than the people that got therapy with the low doses of MDMA. They still got better, but they didn't get as much benefit. So the analogy is you're taking off in an airplane and there's all this turbulence at the beginning, and then you get above the clouds and it's smooth sailing. So it's kind of like that with MDMA. But the part that we discovered that was very surprising was we did a study with veterans, firefighters, and police officers. And one group got 30 milligrams, one group got 75 milligrams, and one group got 125 milligrams. And in that particular study, it was about 26 people, when you randomize, it doesn't mean that everything's equal. It just means it's random. So the people that had 125 milligrams with PTSD had more depression than the people that had 75 milligrams. But the 75 milligram dose group did better than the 125.
Interesting.
Just slightly better. So what it meant was that the dose that's therapeutically effective was lower than we thought.
Can I stop you for a second?
Yeah, please.
When you said the people that did 125 had more depression,
Yeah.
do you mean before the study?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, yes.
So it was chosen that they would get the higher dose because they were suffering more.
Well, no, again, this is randomization.
Right, but you said that they had more depression
Yeah.
before the therapy.
Well,
So how did you determine that?
Well, we evaluate everybody's PTSD symptoms and their depression symptoms, and so just by the randomization, it turned out that those people that were higher on depression ended up more of them in the 125.
Just randomly?
Randomly, yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because when you randomize, again, it doesn't mean that you're making things equal.
Right.
So it was just a chance.
Just turned out that way.
Turned out
How
that
many
way.
people were in this group?
26 people were in
Okay.
the entire study.
Okay, so it was
So-
just dumb luck.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but it meant to us that this dose of 75 was indeed more therapeutic than we anticipated. So there was no real sweet spot where there was a dose of MDMA that didn't either make people uncomfortable and reduce the effectiveness compared to therapy with no MDMA, or it tipped over into being very effective. So when, in November 29th, 2016, when the FDA had what we call the end of phase 2 meeting, after we got approved to go to phase 3, the final studies where you need to prove safety and efficacy, I knew that we shouldn't do that because of this. We shouldn't go directly to phase 3. The FDA offers this opportunity that most pharma companies don't take, called special protocol assessment. And you negotiate every aspect of the phase 3 design with FDA. And it can take, for us it took 8 months. And so pharma companies are thinking, there's nothing unusual what I'm doing, my patent life is expiring. But I knew we needed to do that to discuss how to deal with the double blind. And so we presented this information to the FDA. We said, we will give you blinding if you want with these lower doses, but it's going to make our job easier to find a difference between the full dose and these lower doses because it's going to compromise the therapy as compared to therapy with no MDMA at all. And so we said to the FDA, you tell us what you want. And the FDA chose therapy with inactive placebo to make our job harder, which made sense to me. And they said that there's 2 things that you can do to reduce experimenter bias, because the whole purpose of the double blind is to sort of reduce bias, that you don't know what's going on and everybody just treats everybody the same. They said the first is this random assignment. What that means is everybody's similarly motivated and they will work, and the therapists don't know necessarily that, so you do this random assignment. But then the second thing is that you can't have the therapists or the patients rate themselves on how well they've done compared to baseline. You need independent raters that are blind to the condition that the person that they're evaluating is in.
Okay.
So the raters don't know, did this person get the placebo? Did this person get the MDMA? It's
Just don't look at their pupils.
well, well, this is afterwards, but,
Okay.
but that's right. And it's done on telemedicine. It's done on Zoom.
Zoom,
And
okay.
it's an hour-long interview. And it's with what's called the CAPS, the Clinician-Administered PTSD Scale.
And do they have a series of questions?
Yeah. It's like an hour-long interview about their symptoms related to what they call the index trauma, which is the worst thing that ever happened. You pick this is my index trauma, and how do you respond? So we had these independent raters, and then we had this random assignment, and that's what the FDA said is how we should do the phase 3 studies. What was problematic for us was the people at the FDA that we negotiated this with in 2017 then left the FDA. And then new, more conservative people came in at the Division of Psychiatry. And they were more concerned about this, what they called functional unblinding. And that became an issue at the FDA Advisory Committee meeting and at the FDA when they reviewed whether to approve MDMA-assisted therapy or not. And so the pharma company, Lykos, did not really proactively explain to the advisory committee how this design was developed, why FDA chose this design. And so the people in the advisory committee are often more academics, and they're more focused on this double-blind issue, but they're not practical in a sense. So that the FDA realizes that the double-blind fails in practice a lot. It's a theory of how you want to do things. It's something to strive for, but it doesn't work a lot of the times. Even with SSRIs, you think that Prozac or various drugs that you take that are not psychedelic, that those are easy to double-blind. But they're not, because when people have sexual side effects, they have other side effects, and they report to their therapist what's going on, then they can tell from the side effect profile. So the double-blind fails in practice a lot. But the FDA is saying we can't just only approve drugs where the double-blind is perfect. We have to weigh these different things. So that was one of the big issues that the FDA Advisory Committee objected to, was this functional unblinding. So when you asked about the time frame, there was other issues, but where we're at right now is that there's going to be negotiations between Lykos and the FDA, with the new FDA, with the new people at HHS, and there's the proverbial fork in the road. There's either the FDA will say, we believe your data enough that you're not going to need to do another phase 3 study. They might require what's called a phase 4 study, which is after approval, you gather information about safety, about durability, different things. And if that's the case, it's possible that within 6 months the FDA could say yes to approving MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD. If the FDA says we want another phase 3 study, that could delay approval for another 3.5 years or so. And that's just on an individual basis.
Wow.
So talk about frustration.
Yeah.
I mean, we had incredible outcomes. So the 2 phase 3 studies that were done, the first one was severe PTSD. And what we showed is that 2/3 of the people that had severe PTSD no longer had PTSD after the treatment, which was 42 hours of therapy, 3 MDMA sessions, 1 month apart, 12 90-minute non-drug psychotherapy sessions. 2/3 no longer had PTSD that got therapy plus MDMA. And those people that got therapy without MDMA, with the inactive placebo, roughly 1/3 no longer had PTSD. And then another roughly 20% had what's called clinically significant reductions of PTSD symptoms. Means that their life has changed, their symptoms are not as burdensome, but they still have PTSD. So they're called responders. So we had 88% responders, only 12% non-responders.
Wow.
It's the
That's pretty
best treatment.
extraordinary.
In the second phase 3 study, we purposely moved it to moderate to severe PTSD because we didn't want the FDA to say it's only for severe PTSD. 3/4 of the people did have severe PTSD, and 1/4 had moderate PTSD, and it was 72.6% no longer had PTSD. Almost 3/4 no longer had PTSD at this 2-month follow-up. And what was even more remarkable, and this relates, I think, to the concerns that was expressed about bias and functional unblinding, is that 46% of the people that had therapy with no MDMA also went below the threshold of having a PTSD diagnosis. That's better than any of the other therapies for PTSD. And so what that demonstrated is that the therapist, even though most of them could tell the difference between whether somebody had MDMA or not, that they tried just as hard as they could to help people, whether they got the MDMA or not, and we got extraordinary results in the control group. And I think one of the things that is the explanation is that when you have an 8-hour therapy session with music, with headphones, with more or less half the time people are inside having these different feelings, and the other half they're talking to the therapist in no particular order, you're not forced to focus on the therapy the way with prolonged exposure or cognitive processing therapy. That's what I said was re-traumatizing. In the studies that the VA did, roughly half the people dropped out. We had very low dropout rates because people are encouraged to we support whatever's emerging. That's the essence of the therapeutic approach that has been developed to support people when they're going through MDMA therapy. And it's very similar to what can be done with psilocybin or LSD or even ibogaine, that you just support whatever's emerging. You have this sense that there's a wisdom of the unconscious. We all know that our body has a certain wisdom in that it moves towards wholeness. We get cuts, it heals. It's below our level of awareness. So there's some kind of wisdom to what's emerging. You could think about it as this barrier, this permeable barrier, semi-permeable barrier between the conscious and the unconscious. And it all happens, we all know, at dreams, that material rises to our awareness at dreams. And it's like that with psychedelics. And so we just support whatever's emerging, and people can go to some happy memories or to layers of trauma, whatever. They're not forced to just focus on the trauma. So we have very low dropout rates. But the people that got the therapy without MDMA were able to make incredible progress. And we also have what are called fidelity ratings, which is we videotape all the sessions, and then we have raters, are called adherence raters, and they look at are people adhering to the therapeutic method, and then that's called fidelity. We had over 90% fidelity, meaning that the therapists really were doing the same, whether it was placebo or not. So the results were outstanding in that way, and the side effects were very low. We had nobody commit suicide that received MDMA. That was one of the concerns. We had one woman tried to kill herself twice, but she was in the placebo group. And we had another woman, such severe suicidal ideation, she checked herself into a hospital not to kill herself. She was also in the placebo group. Because when you help people with terrible trauma, it's difficult for them. And they're not able to really process. That's why they had long-term PTSD. So we demonstrated remarkable results, and yet the FDA said we need more data. We need more data. I think it's tragic.
It is tragic, but it's also very hopeful. The results are very hopeful, and I'm always hoping that people come around. Do you ever really consider, though, the burden of responsibility that lays on your shoulders? Like, you have been at the forefront of this for decades, and I imagine a world where a guy like you doesn't exist, because it's really easy for you to not exist. I only know you. You know what I'm saying? Like,
right.
You have been responsible for